So I want to just take a few moments to welcome all of you all. Uh, First, to welcome Beth Lowe, and second, Jennifer Ling Datchuk. And you can tell by what we're wearing that we're in three different parts of the country. you know, yes, Beth is it still chilly there?
You know, day before yesterday and the day before that were absolutely beautiful. Blue sky, but today it's snowing. So that's the mountains for you.
Yeah, we've had weather like that except minus the snow. And Jennifer, of course, is in summer. And I guess you could say we're in spring. Here's the beauty of it. So at any rate, I just want to take a few minutes to welcome all of you all to this wonderful artist talk. I mean, anytime you can get together with such special artists as these and have them tell us what's important to them and how it goes into their work, it's really very, very meaningful. So we're very glad that you could join us today in this year of uncertainty, which is actually the name of the exhibition, in which they're the stars, and the show goes on until April 20th. So anytime or any way you can join us, that would be wonderful. And in terms of our group here, we have an amazing group that includes fellow fans and fellow artists, as well as professors and critics and curators. So this is all, I think, due to the quality of the art and the artists, Beth and Jennifer. So thank you very much. We're really glad that we can get together with you all when we can't get together with you physically. So I trust that you can hear me, and if you can't, let me know. And on the other hand, I'm not going to be speaking that long either. I'm just going to give a very brief introduction of Beth and Jennifer, and then let them take over. So just in terms of the show, or just a few words, uh, these both of these artists, they share some similarities in that they're both of Chinese heritage. Beth is full Chinese and Jennifer is half, and I think they'll talk about that a little later on. Both artists use the lens of their cultural identity as first generation daughters of Chinese parents, magnified by this year of pandemic and political unrest. Though they are separated by several decades, they share many things, including the perspective of being perceived as actually culturally different from most Americans, whether they are or they aren't, an effect amplified by their being of Chinese heritage at a time when China is in the forefront of the news. So first, I'm going to turn to Beth for her introduction. And Beth received her MFA under Rudy Audio at the University of Montana. That must have been wonderful. What days to study, right?
It was very, very special. It was a great time in Montana too.
Oh, and then did you? I know you went on to succeed Rudy. Was that? I mean, how many years were in between when you
Um,
studied with him and then?
I think just 2
It's
years.
a real honor for
It
you.
was, it was a huge honor. It was
You must
huge.
have been a star pupil.
Well, I think it was just the right time for
Yeah,
me. No, I'm sorry, it was more than 2 years. What was it? But anyway,
it wasn't a long time.
it wasn't a super long time, and I'm just extremely grateful that I got to stay in Montana, which is an
I
important part.
know. What a beautiful state.
Yep.
I love it. Totally that big sky that is so true.
Yeah.
Anyway, you have, Beth has gone on to receive many accolades, including being made Montana's Potter Laureate. If only we had that in Massachusetts.
Just
And
make it
what'd you say?
just make it up.
We could make it up. Yeah, we could. I'm not sure if they have the same ring, but anyway, we could try until they believe it. So, and also I want to comment on your receiving the prestigious USA Hoy Award. Was it from the Hoys they were the ones that gave the money that you
There are
got?
various donors that donate
Okay.
to the United States Artist
Yeah.
Fellowships.
So this is not just a little award, it's a $50,000 award. And that's another similarity that she and Jennifer share, because Jennifer received it too. So just to say before I forget that. Now that you have retired from teaching, you're happily living in Missoula, and
Yes.
you're maintaining your studio practice. And it's just a pleasure to see your work, which keeps evolving. There has been a wonderful monograph published about you that John Natsoulis published, right? Who's
Right.
another gallery that represents you. And your work can be found in the collections of the Alfred Museum, the Tweed in Duluth, and Microsoft, among many others. So, Beth, you were born in Lafayette, Indiana, and both of your parents were born in China. I know you'll talk about that some more. She is known for her figurative sculpture and pottery, in which she blends her identity as a first generation Chinese with her experience of living in the United States. Beth draws on her family for reference and imagery as she tells this story with objectivity and irony. I love that. It's just like a clear picture image that you put down that people find so wonderful. Anyway, it captures so well snapshots in your life and ours. This is so now I will turn to Jennifer. And Jennifer, we're so happy to welcome you here. I know that one of the reasons you were so eager to show was your admiration for Beth, and that you hold each other in great esteem is really wonderful. So Jennifer is currently assistant professor of ceramics at Texas State University. I have to applaud myself every time I remember that, because I could say a different kind of university in Texas. Anyway, you're living in and maintaining a studio practice in San Antonio, and you're also represented by Ruiz Healy Art, which is in Texas, and New York City. Your work can be found in the Museum of Fine Arts, and you are about to have a one-person solo exhibition at the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft in 2021. And as I stated before, you also received the prestigious USA Fellowship. Jennifer Ling Datchuk was born in Warren, Ohio. Her mother is full Chinese and her father is Russian and of Eastern European ancestry. What Jennifer reveals is what it is like to be a woman today, always seen as Asian or other than typically American. Her work is very much about issues of race, gender, and identity. I'm sorry, I'm stumbling. Issues of race, gender, and identity. A multimedia ceramic artist, Jennifer works with porcelain and other materials often associated with traditional women's work, such as textiles and hair, to discuss fragility, beauty, femininity, intersectionality, identity, and personal history. This is her first exhibition at this gallery. And again, we're so pleased about that. Thank you, Jennifer. Yay. So now I'm going to turn it over to Beth, who's going to start the artist talks.
Excuse me, Lucy?
Yes.
I'm only seeing a picture of one of Beth's vases on the screen.
That's all I'm seeing too. Is that what you want, Tanya?
Yeah, because she's going to talk about it.
Okay, it was just up there for the whole time I was talking.
Okay.
Sorry, okay, we're learning, Nancy.
Thank you.
Okay, at least it should move on because now the images will be synced to Beth. Let's see if that happens. Hey, Beth.
That sounds great. Thank you, Lucy. And hi to everybody, and welcome and hello to my friends and family and fellow artists. And thanks so much to Lucy and to Tanya for putting this together, and to Jennifer for showing up. And I just wanted to give a really very quick introduction to my work. If you haven't been familiar with the kinds of pieces, when you've lived as long as I have, you've done lots of different kinds of work. But a big pivotal change came for me in my work when I had my son, Ty Horgan, who is now 34 years old. And when he was born, I stopped doing non-representational abstract or just plain pottery and started thinking about what was the most important in my life, which whatever was like on my mind is what I wanted to make work about. So parenthood was huge. And I started doing this series called the Good Children series. A lot of my work have images of children and babies and good Chinese children that are way precocious and helping the revolution and just being amazingly overboard. It's sort of like fulfilling my expectation as a parent. My overly positive expectation as a parent. But anyway, after having a child, what the other connection that happened is I started thinking more about my parents and also about their immigrant experience and about my ethnicity in general. So this led to quite a long series of work that involves all things Asian, and yet I was born in America and I'm probably culturally stronger influenced by American culture than Chinese culture, yet experiencing racism as early as as I can remember, practically as a child. The Asian American experience is kind of what my work is about. So again, saying that things, whatever is like big on my mind is what I make work about. The last 2 years have been fraught with crazy events and anxiety. And so I want to talk about sort of three main things that happened in the past couple of years as I was making work for this show. First of all, my mom passed away in 2019. The second thing was that COVID hit. That was a biggie for everybody. And then the political situation in the United States and the election of 2020. Those are three things that created sort of extra pressure on all of us. But starting with this piece is called After Joshuen 2021. So my mother's name was Joshuen Shen Lo. And late in life, she started doing these Chinese paintings based on calligraphy. And she was pretty good. She was an amazing brush painter. And the last 5 years of her life, she spent quite a bit of time in Missoula, Montana, where my friend Nancy helped take care of her. And the thing that we did to enjoy doing the most together was painting. So she had never had a studio. So she would come into my studio. We'd put Patsy Cline on the cassette and listen to it over and over and over and over and over again. And we would both paint. And little by little, I started incorporating some of her paintings into my vessels. But after she passed away, I did pieces. I did this piece to start with. This is called 99 Years. And it is a takeout box for every 11 years of her life, I guess. So there are 9 boxes. And I copied her paintings onto these boxes, or my versions of her paintings. I ended up loving her landscape brush painting even more than I liked her flowers and bamboo and calligraphy. I thought she really had a nice touch with the landscape. So these are 9 boxes, and each of them have several paintings of, it has her name and my name on it, and they're done in red, white, and blue to indicate the American side of my upbringing. And I'll just talk a little bit about the takeout box, which is something that I think really came to prominence during the COVID time, where everybody is having takeout food. And I made my own model of a takeout box. This is not a slip cast of a real takeout box, because I like a little bit of mark making on the surface. So they're all, it's also not a typical size. It's slightly smaller than the big one and bigger than the small one that you can get. But the takeout box is a very interesting combo, Western, Eastern thing in itself, because it was invented by the British as a way of taking a flat piece of paper and folding it up, not unlike an origami thing, to create this very handy container. So, so this piece that you're looking at right now is just a riff off of the takeout boxes. This one with the 2 plates that says, I think it says, Daddy eats chow mein and Mommy eats dumplings. And then there's the ceramic chopsticks and the ceramic cups, and the mother is drinking tea, the father is drinking coffee, and then there's a replica of a takeout box. This is sort of a lightweight riff on the takeout box, but if you go to the next slide, this is a little bit more specific about the immigrant experience. Again, the idea of the takeout box refers to food. Food refers to nurturing or feeding. So I think about these boxes as representing something that nurtures our lives and our bodies and our culture. So this piece is specifically about the trip that my mother and father took from China with the dotted line that ends up in the United States, and me being sort of a product, so that the 2 countries are linked by their handles, and the map of China and the map of the United States kind of turning into one thing, which is what I feel like I am, the combo. The takeout box, these are some other riffs on the takeout box. So I started thinking about not only the Chinese chop suey pail, you might call it, but then also the typical sort of hamburger styrofoam McDonald's box. And once again, feeling a little bit like some kind of a combo between having eaten tons of McDonald's and refusing Chinese. When I was little, I would only eat fried rice. That would be the only Chinese food that I wanted. I would much rather have gone to McDonald's as a child. But of course, now I'm a cook and a lover of Chinese food. But this piece is really about, I wanted to mush those boxes together. You know, I wanted to think of them as one, how they create one whole. And so the takeout boxes are specifically as a result of the COVID situation where you have to take out food, and then also about the blending of the 2 cultures. Okay, we can go to these other vase forms. So when COVID first hit, I talked to a lot of my artist friends, and everybody was saying, I can't concentrate. I don't know what to do. I'm in my studio, but it's so hard. I don't know what's going to happen. And so for me, I think I was lucky that I had a deadline. So I did something that I did also after 9/11, which was concentrate on making these coil pot forms. And coiling is very much like knitting, which became very popular during COVID. There's an article in the recent New Yorker about how knitting became all the rage because the process of coil building is repetitive, requires patience, it requires quiet, it's calming, it's a wonderful activity. So coiling, I made these coil vases, and these 2 particular vases are lidded jars, so they feel more compact and more homey. They're fairly large for me. So I don't know, like 25 to 30 inches tall. And this one in particular they're both about shelter and about finding a home. I thought a lot about how within my studio, I'm so lucky to have a place where I can go. And actually COVID turned out to be a good thing because it allowed for lots of solitary time. And my son Ty bought a house. He bought a lawnmower. It was a big deal for him to buy a lawnmower. And so there's a portrait of his house on the top. And the last piece and this piece are really about thinking about how we all have need for comfort and how we all wish for home and shelter and belonging. This piece is called Waiting, and it's also very much about the period of waiting for things to come around again and not knowing what's going to happen. And the stairs give you an indication that there's something in the past or something in the future. And then once again, there are replicas of my mother's painting on the bottom. The other thing I felt like I wanted to do during COVID and because of the election is I wanted to do something that was helpful. And I wanted to make work that directly was about COVID and could do something to help. Sometimes I think when we make work, even if it's very political, you're preaching to the choir, and I don't know if it changes people's minds that much. So I've made 2 series that are fundraisers. These are the COVID plates about things that happen when you have a mask on. So this says, I can't see. So their glasses are blurring up. And the next piece, which is about voting rights. And I made a series before and after the election because the issue is still very much alive about how it's important to enfranchise all the different groups and minorities in the United States so that we can really truly hear the voices. I feel like voting is super important. So the COVID plates have been benefit for the Emerson Hospital in Concord, Massachusetts, through Lucy's Gallery, and then also the Montana Food Bank, and the latest group is benefiting the Montana Nurses Association, and the voting rights plates have gone for Forward Montana, which is a voter registration group run by young people that are great. So there's those pieces, and then I think the last 2 images are the rice and tea caddies, which really are just sort of to sum up all my different interests. They have, they're about food, they're about warmth and comfort, and about being Asian American and what kinds of things are important to Asian Americans. And on the backs are the images of, they have these little speech bubbles that you can just see coming out of their mouths, and one says tea and one says rice, and they have an image. There's one image of a rice paddy field and the other of a hillside of tea plants. I think that's the last slide.
Thank you, Beth. Those were beautiful.
You're welcome. So we can turn it over to Jennifer and
let Jennifer take the baton.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Lucy. Thank you for this opportunity. Like, it's such an honor for me to show with Beth, someone who I've looked up to for really, I hate saying for a really long time, but like you really are, like, I know you said you're too old to be an elder, but you are a senior, but I so appreciate your work. And I found Beth's work when I was a grad student, and I told her this, I reminded her of this earlier, that I had emailed her in 2005. We had a prompt to email an artist and ask them how do they nurture creativity, and she like emailed me back right away. And that was like so affirming as a student and as a Chinese artist to hear from her that I think I even printed out that email. It's living somewhere in an old sketchbook. So I really appreciate that. So thank you. Thank you for being here. I hope this finds you safe and well during this time. In case you don't know, my work has always been about the exploration of my layered identity as a woman, as an Asian woman, as an American, and as a third culture kid. But I'm also the daughter of an immigrant, the granddaughter of factory women, and I come from a long line of service section Asians. And I think about how this labor, the invisible labor that happens in this world, creates comfort and convenience for others while never considering the person behind the mask or at your feet. And I said I didn't want to make work about the pandemic, and I think it was just like too much to make work while in the moment. And we still very much are. But I really think about the effect of the pandemic on women and the many roles we juggle as sisters, daughters, mothers, partners, caretakers, and teachers, to just name a few. And how do we take care of our communities, our families, or even ourselves during this time of political unrest, social injustices, and extreme wealth inequalities? What can we do to protect our bodies, share our stories, rest without feeling guilty, and love without feeling shame? So the first piece here is kitty cat pat scratcher, and thinking about how we all deserve a pat on the back right now for just like surviving this past year. That I hope you can give yourself a pat on the back, but also I feel really fortunate I have a partner who we've been able to hug and touch during this time. But I think of so many of my friends or family who are alone, and that craving and that just need for touch. And so this is a little back scratcher for you to reach back and touch yourself and just reaffirm that you will be okay. And so there's a theme throughout these works that they really reference a lot of bamboo, and specifically like the lucky bamboo. So this is a little purse called Lucky. And growing up, I was always taught the importance of like good fortune and good luck. Like everything was associated with that, I used to think something was wrong with me because bad things always happen, that I had some kind of curse placed upon me or my family. But I think about bamboo in terms of like an Asian aesthetic seen in paintings and art. But this lucky bamboo, which you see at grocery stores during Chinese New Year, and they even have it at IKEA, that it has a lot to like promote the idea of feng shui in people's homes, and this like commodification of culture that happens when you buy 1 stock, 3 stock, 5 stocks, 21 stocks in your home means that you will have good luck and good fortune coming to you. But the thing about the lucky bamboo that I find really fascinating is that it's not even, it's not originated in China, that it's actually cultivated and grown in Africa, then exported to Asia to come to the United States for Asian markets to promote this idea of Chinese culture. So in the piece Rise Up, I'm still working with the idea of the bamboo, porcelain bamboo, and here it's a small ladder with a found figurine of an Asian woman with a child. And that how often the kitschy kind of Asian figurines I find like fetishize the female's body, but this was one where I found it was a tender moment between mother and child. And the ladder really represents how I can only be here today because my mother fled a war-torn country, that my family had to go through so much for me to have a better life than them, and that so much of the work of our mothers helped us rise up in this world. I scratch your back, you scratch none is very much reflective of the labor that provides comfort and care, of thinking of something as simple as a back scratcher, which I saw at a CVS checkout. It was a whole display of Oriental bamboo back scratchers for 99 cents, and how something so cheap and simple and easy can help you relieve an out of reach itch. But looking at images during the pandemic when we were debating whether or not to open, like in April of last year, so much of it was the screaming of, I need a haircut, I need my nails done, but not thinking about how it's the labor of Black, brown, and yellow bodies risking their lives to paint someone's nails during a pandemic. So this is a pair of back scratchers with sculpted human hands at the end with long red fingernails adorned with crystals. And bamboo ceiling is another little bamboo ladder with broken porcelain shards, of thinking too of these conversations, and it keeps coming up, of the gender inequalities that have been perpetuated because of the pandemic, but a lot of these existed for women of color way before this, of how so many conversations of equal pay, of trying to pass an equal pay law, that there's so many things as women we need to do to shatter the bamboo ceiling so we have more power and more voices and like positions of power in the world. but for like Asian women, we also need to break through the bamboo ceiling. And often when we see these like graphs about like the woman's dollar compared to the male's dollar, it also comes down to the breakdown of race, and that to lump all Asian women together is really complicated because there's such diversity within being Asian. So keep your goals away from the trolls or bamboo letters attached to the wall with sticky putty, like the poster tack you would use to hang posters in your teenage bedroom. That this came from a fortune cookie that a friend had in her wallet for almost 10 years. And during this time, and part of my practice, I collect affirmations, phrases or words of encouragement to help us along in our journey. They're kind of like verbal pats on the back, but there were like, I was starting to find these fortunes that were like really positive, but made me really reflect on the time. So one of them was take a deep breath before you roar. It's much better than the ones you would get that say like you will one day see the pyramids of Egypt. And so I really was taking these fortunes and making them bigger in the style of bamboo. So another thing to consider about bamboo is that it's really strong, it's malleable, it's flexible, that it's hard to break. But I also think about how so much like bamboo is considered an invasive plant that people who often have it in their yard are struggling to keep it from popping up and growing. But I think about that invasive plant as a metaphor for the resilience of women and how we continue to thrive and grow. Like even the lucky bamboo that is grown to curl, it takes years for it to be manipulated to grow and form that spiral. And I feel like no matter what keeps getting thrown at women, we pop up and keep growing, we swerve and we dart and we move around, and that we are going to find ways to continue to thrive. Double happiness is, everyone calls it like bamboo handcuffs. They live in a protected plexi case, and that red is a mirror plexi. So when you approach it, you see your reflection in it. But the idea of double happiness is something that's promoted in Chinese culture of it's the symbol, and like objects are given upon like a new marriage because this is the joining of two, and that there's a double happiness in your household, your future, your fortune. It's a really beautiful sentiment, but I think it's also sometimes represented as a figure 8. So this is my version of double happiness. It's done bamboo in the style of handcuffs, and thinking of how I'm so lucky and fortunate to come from a culture which provides such ancestral strength, and that I come from a long lineage of like really hardworking, proud women, but how sometimes that is so hard when especially for me growing up biracial, where I was often like less than, not seen as whole, not seen as wholly Chinese, but of something I very much grew up rooted in. So in some ways, it's the handcuffs I have to my own culture and my sense of identity. And then these last 2 pieces are called Flawless, and they are mirrored plexi mirrors. So you also see your reflection upon them with these porcelain, my version of like the Asian beauty sheet mask. So I think too, part of this idea of like self-care and like how we take care of ourselves during this time, like Asian sheet masks with popular and funny patterns, they are supposed to provide this like moment where you can let this serum soak in and feel good about your skin and maybe yourself for a little bit. So this idea of pausing and reflecting. But I took my sheet masks and adorned them with these collected decals and blue and white transfers that I've been collecting on my travels to Jindajin since 2006, and how so many of these patterns are still found in many Chinese porcelain objects. And like this idea too, to look in this mirror and find love in yourself, and also find the love and strength from your ancestors, and that to find like beauty within ourselves during this like really difficult time. So I want like to remind us to take care of ourselves through like the objects we surround ourselves with. So think of the objects of self-care, kind of the affirmations you carry forward, and how do you reconcile the complicated feelings of your family and culture during this time. And I think on top of that, how are we taking care of our communities? So I hope we can all take a moment to reflect and pause on that, and like moving forward, as I hope we don't return back to whatever that normal is, and that we're creating a new space going forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was really wonderful. And I just want to segue to the next part of the presentation, which I think will be quite interesting, maybe the most interesting, because I'm going to ask a couple of questions, but it's not because of that. It's really because after that, Jennifer and Beth are going to ask each other questions. And I think that will be very sweet, and that I look forward to hearing that, and so forth. So we have a short question and answer period. We'll just see how long this takes. If we have maybe 5 or 10 minutes in the end, and if maybe 2 or 3 people want to ask a question, we'll see if we can handle that. So I just have 2 questions to both of you. And the first one is about your commentary and reaction, which I have to ask this question on the current situation where we're having so much hostility toward Asians, and especially Asian women. And I mean, I don't know, for that, my heart goes out to you. And I know that you're deeply concerned and this is about you. So I just thought, if you wouldn't mind just saying a few words from your own perspective, each of you, Beth and Jennifer. Jennifer, you want to answer first? You look like you're...
Oh, I think Beth should answer first.
No, I think Jennifer should answer first.
Actually, no, Beth, you answer first.
Oh,
I think you answer first.
Okay. Well, it's extremely disturbing. There's always been prejudice against Asian Americans and Chinese in particular, and I felt it when I was a child, especially, I think, and I saw it happen to my parents, not being able to rent places or apologizing for being Chinese, and all that filters into your consciousness as you're growing up. But this recent acceleration of that, I mean, I think there were various periods. There was a period where Chinese couldn't bring their brides. They wouldn't be allowed to be married. There was a Chinese Exclusion Act. It's all fairly recent, in the 60s even, where Chinese were sort of embraced into the United States society. But this recent spate of aggression, I think, is partially brought about by our former president, who is not to be named. And to blame COVID on the Chinese is ridiculous. And calling it the Chinese virus and things like that are things that foment this kind of aggression. And some of those COVID plates, I have people blaming each other and saying, this is your fault, and China versus US, and that sort of acceleration of aggression. The issue against women, I think, has come from some of the early stereotypes of women as sex objects or dragon ladies in the movies. The history of the military in Korea and Southeast Asia, of finding the comfort women in Korea who were prostitutes set up by governments so that they had to endure these terrible rapes, really. And then in my Chinese American community, there have been emails going around from some of our friends saying, oh yeah, I was accosted and people would say things like, oh, you remind me of my Korean girlfriend in the Korean War. And just assuming that there was going to be a sexual connection there. And personally, I have not felt a sexual aggression, but, and I've been very lucky in feeling very comfortable as an Asian American and even celebrating it through my work. I've been respected in my community, maybe because there aren't very many Chinese in Montana, although there were railroad workers and things. I am concerned about the aggression against older Chinese women. I think that's really weird. And the only thing that I would say in general is that there's always been a pecking order. And even my mother, I recognized racism from her in her life towards other Chinese of different, who spoke different dialects. You know, they would be lesser, or who could I marry? Okay, best to marry a Chinese, but if you don't marry Chinese, don't marry Japanese, because they were so cruel to the Chinese in World War II, or don't marry a Black, you know. So people seem to want to set up these pecking orders. And I think the best outcome of this latest aggression is for us to recognize and join in fighting racism sort of overall, rather than, I guess I feel like there might be better communication now, even between Asians or between Asians and Blacks. So those are sort of my reactions to the current situation.
I definitely have gone through like the stages of grief over what has happened, and it's not because it's something new, because it's amplified and there's so much more attention. And I think for me, I have the similar experience of experiencing racism, of being called, I've learned I was Asian because of the racial ethnic slur that was flung at me. And so to be recognized as Asian in that moment is like, as a young child, you become very aware of that. And like, then to be a young child and look up and see your mother go through it, but then like swallow it and bury it down, and it's never talked about. So I think even like we're a generation apart, like seeing how much has changed from your generation to my generation in terms of how vocal we are and speaking up and out, I think has gotten so much better, of how we do live in the United States of amnesia. So even what you said, a lot of people don't know the history, because why is Chinese history taught in school, but also the history of Chinese helped build America, like with one railroad tie at a time. It's really, they're really responsible for building the infrastructure in this country. I think I've experienced misogyny, and I think my parents were so hard to talk to. Like I could never feel comfortable talking about it with anyone. I also grew up in places where no one else looked like us. So there was no outlet to have these conversations. But also I think we were taught to be dutiful daughters and like swallow that bitterness. I feel too, like this whole year, there's been a huge racial reckoning, but I'm still really frustrated that not much has changed. Like, I mean, and I don't know if it's partly because we still are living under a pandemic that, but I'm really hopeful for like my students, like this generation, and how they are speaking up. At the beginning of the pandemic, I contributed to like an interview here in San Antonio about of hearing COVID being called the Chinese virus when I was out in public. And after I did that, I received all these hateful emails about how I was able to get my knocks in about our current president, how I don't even look Chinese. And they came from emails too that had really awful like gun names in them. So like, this is what happens too when you speak up, is like, then you're fearful of what's next. So I think even during this time too, I've gotten so many like thinking of you messages, and like it made me realize for the first time I might be people's only Asian friend, but I also can't be their only educator. And that was kind of overwhelming. And Yeah, I'm tired too. Like this has like been a really long, heavy year. Yeah, and I think that was partly why I didn't want to make work about the pandemic, but I also feel like my work has always been about labor or some ways these things. It's just being amplified now. Um, yeah.
One little tiny way that I think we combat racism is by just exposure, you know, to things that are foreign for the larger society. So if I always put Chinese writing all over my work, and I know nobody can understand it, but to develop a level of comfort with things that are not comprehensible or different, I think I'm of the sort of very polite, make nice Chinese girl, just a little inch at a time rather than an aggressive statement. So I guess I at least justify my work by saying, hopefully I can change consciousness a little at a time. Lucy and I were talking about like on TV, you see a lot more racial mixed couples. And just in the New Yorker today, I saw two cartoons, one where it was specifically colored in a brown person and a white person, two little kids playing together, and another where it was a black and white cartoon, but one character was clearly black and the other was white. And I think it's sort of like affirmative action. It's very conscious and deliberate, but I don't think it's harmful. I think that exposure and comfort level is a little inroad into breaking down some of those barriers. So
Oh, for sure. Like I often talk about, like Barack Obama said in a speech that millennials are the most racially diverse of any generation before them, and that just keeps increasing. But I think because of that too, like I think the conversations of identity that are happening in households is so much stronger. Like no one ever talked to me about what it meant to be Chinese. I was just supposed to know how to do all the Chinese things. And then in those moments, I either got yelled at or praised. And I think we talked about we'd get laughed at, but the laughing was a praise in some ways. That I see this much more in the younger generation of like real, like wanting to investigate and know where they come from, where their families' histories lie, and also how they can use that to build communities. And I think with this exposure, I hope we only build coalitions more, because we do need all of us to work together to like really combat the deeply entrenched systems of white supremacy that exist in our country, really all over the world.
Yeah, I want to thank you both for sharing that. And this has been a really difficult year and a year of learning, and hopefully a watershed, and a wearing away of some older patterns and things getting better. So thank you. Beth, do you and Jennifer want to, you had your questions. Why don't you ask each other? And then I might ask one at the end. Does that sound okay?
Sure.
Okay. I turn it over to you again.
Let's see. Well, maybe I'll just start with that idea of you just mentioned, Jennifer, about not being Chinese or not being Western. And I was wondering how that being half-half affected your work, how you decided to adopt the Chinese part of yourself to make work about, and how it's different from if you have friends that are ABCs or FOBs. I'm just going to say one really quick thing. I think I didn't become truly comfortable with my identity until I went to what we call Chinese family camp, which was in high school, which was all Chinese American kids. And all of a sudden I went, oh, that's my community. That's the people that I don't have to explain myself to. So I don't know. I'm just thinking about.
Yeah, I think I really make work from the idea of existing within this third space. And so I probably, I make work through like this Chinese cultural lens, but I'm also looking at like pop culture, what is contemporary culture, what like the global migrations of information that are happening in the world, and how like all these things are traveling all over the world, and like we're becoming shaped and influenced by them. I've always made work about my identity, and I think, and that has changed and gone through many different forms throughout my practice. For a long time, I said I made work about the perspective of being half. And I realized after a while that was always talking about my sense of identity through like the division of myself. And like in Thailand, you're called a half child. So you're not even like allowed to be a full child, because if you're half white, you're a half child. But someone told me in Japan that you're called double devil. And you are celebrated for having both. And like that kind of like flipped a switch in my thinking, and that like I'm both. I can make work about being both, and that I'm like very proud to be both in many ways. And I think it wasn't until like the past 2 or 3 years I've included in Asian exhibitions. So also knowing that I think people are starting to recognize my voice matters in this conversation, because like even you, Beth, like you're American born Chinese. I'm American born Chinese and a half, but I'm definitely not an FOB, which is fresh off the boat, which is something you kind of, I felt like as American born Chinese, we said to fresh off the boat Chinese, because we didn't know better. I know that's awful.
Well, I think that's the thing about pecking order. Everybody seems to have a little pecking order and then find their comfort zone. And it's important to just either, first of all, recognize it and then get beyond it, hopefully get beyond it and embrace and just be open to more. And that's what our goals are.
I guess like when you were in school or like your career as an artist, did you feel pressured to not make work about being Chinese, or use, like, I think I loved what you said about putting like Chinese characters in your work, because you know people can't read them.
Yeah, and I was always, I just found myself attracted to things foreign, actually. Even I remember seeing work that had Spanish written all over it, and I couldn't read Spanish, and I just liked the comfort of discomfort, you know. And so that was something that gave me permission to explore translation and misunderstanding. But yeah, you asked me if I had ever been told not to make work about being Chinese, and I did. I went to, I'm going to even use the name, Dorothy Weiss Gallery, and was showing her my work in the 70s, and she just said, it's too easy. Don't do that anymore. And wow. I understand you don't want your work to be too easy. You don't want it to be so easy that it becomes hackneyed or boring or super sweet or any of those kinds of things. But I think basically I just ended up reasserting myself and saying, this, I have to make work about this, because this is what I'm interested in. I'm interested in that state of being in between cultures, and I'm proud of it, like you say. And it gave me finally, I think a lot of critiques in general, it makes you figure out what you want to reject from that critique and what you want to keep. And so for me, it's not that it was about being Chinese, but what you do with it. And I don't know if Richard Notkin is here. I know he was going to be here, but I was thinking about how easy it is to take Trump and make, oops, I said his name, to take that guy and make work about him, but it's what you do with it. So Notkin made these incredible Trumpolini portraits that's based on a historical form about Mussolini, and it's so inventive and so recognizable. I mean, you've seen plenty of bad art about the political situation, and his is good art. So it's not that it's easy to take a subject, but it's hard to figure out what to do with it to push a little farther.
Yeah.
Make it your own.
Yeah, and make it your own. Have your
That's
own.
so interesting. I remember when I was in undergrad, I had a critique with like a really well-known, famous male ceramic artist. I will tell you the name later in private, but I was very much making work about the Chinese women in my family. I made these really awkward bunny rabbit sculptures, and I made little human hair wigs for them. So I was making work about my family, but like I didn't have the language to be able to talk about it the way I do now. And I showed them my slides because that's how we used to look at work. And he was like, what makes your story any different or what makes your story different than any girl in Los Angeles right now?
Oh, gee.
And I remember like getting that wash of discomfort over me. Like I remember turning red, but I also didn't know how to, like, this is me being good Chinese. Like, don't talk back to this person who has like prestige and is like elevated in our community. And I remember after he left, talking to the grads and going, that lit a fire under my ass, because this is why this is important. Like, and I still like hold that really tight, because there's also a lack of awareness to want to try and learn why these stories are important.
Yeah. Beth, the two of you have other questions to ask each other? Were there
I have another one that I didn't even spring on Jennifer before, but I'm also up for if there are questions from the audience.
Yeah.
I thought we'll ask one more question and then we'll do the audience part. How's that?
Okay, so I'm sorry, did you want to ask a question or did you want me to?
Go ahead.
Oh, you were saying that to Jennifer?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm curious about this question you're going to spring on me.
Oh. Well, you had mentioned working with the Vietnamese in the nail salons.
Yeah.
And I would just like to hear a little bit about that, because I think one of the things I admire about you is I think well, first of all, I really like your intellect, and and I like that you dig a little deeper into certain areas that you seem fearless, and so I wanted to ask about the nail salon experiences.
So I'm definitely not an artist that like goes into the studio and touches clay and I start making things. I'm very much an artist that wants to be like immersed in my community. So for me, even when I go to residencies or even my community of San Antonio, I like to go out and meet other people and hear their stories. So the nail salons throughout San Antonio, majority are Vietnamese owned. And I think also that is predominantly throughout the United States. It's a form of immigration for them to come here. That when I go, like I love asking them, give me blue and white nails. And they're like, oh, like the blue and white pottery. So even like everyone kind of has a sense of like ceramic patterns or this origin of blue and white. But there's so much labor. It's this total art form in itself too, like nail art and decoration. But I find that when I go, I end up seeing women that look like me. And in San Antonio, which is a minority majority city, Asians are kind of spread out, and we are the 7th largest city in the United States. So it's a way for me to like connect with my community, and like ask like, where do you get your hair done? Like, where do you go grocery shopping? Where do you find the best prices for this? Like, I feel like I'm immersed amongst my aunties again. I love being a part of it. And I often hear them too, and I almost could pick it up. They'll like lean over to the person next to them and I hear them say in like Vietnamese, like, she doesn't look like, her eyes look Chinese, but her nose doesn't. Like, I can recognize it now in like all the Asian languages now. So I love that too. And then we end up talking about their children and like how they're being raised here. But also like, the nail salon is like the site of community for women. Also recognizing too, like nail art and like nail fashion, like really comes from African American women, and how Asian women helped make it more affordable. There's a really great documentary called Nailed It. I'm kind of just really interested in like all these histories and stories that happen in these places, which are really great forms of community and solace for women.
Yeah, that's great. And I do admire that I'm very shy. So the idea of going out and probing people for their stories, I think that's very good and great information to know.
Hey, Beth, maybe you'll go to a nail salon.
Not me.
Really?
No, not done. Didn't even get my hair cut professionally till I was like 45. Cut my own.
You're lucky you have that kind of hair that you
Yeah, straight.
easy to cut.
Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, before we let the audience ask a few questions, Jennifer, do you have another question for Beth or?
Yeah, I want to go back to that question I emailed you like in 2005. Like, how do you nurture creativity?
Oh, wow.
Okay.
This is such a thing.
Well, you mean in my own work? How do I keep working? Yeah.
Life. I think as artists, we like our work. I don't know. What do you do for fun? I said I like to make my work, and I'm like, that's also work. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, I'm lucky because I also have music as a career too. And that's very different. You're communicating with somebody all the time, or at least I don't play solo. So that's one thing that's very, very helpful. But when I'm in my studio, that's a special time. And I'll go to my studio even if I don't know what I'm going to make. Deadlines, of course, are very, very helpful. If you have a deadline, you just go, I got to make something. But I usually, if I'm stuck for any reason, I usually get the sketchbook out and I just start doodling. And those tea and rice caddies, those came out of a doodle. I
love those, Beth.
And people have responded to those very, very positively. And I kind of went, oh, I don't really know why I'm making this, but I just felt like I just drew them and I went, oh, I'll just draw this.
I think they're great and they're a whole new direction for you.
Yeah, they are.
See them bigger.
Yeah, I'm gonna follow your advice, Lucy. I'm gonna make some big ones and see what they look like or if they scare me.
Well, on this note, why don't we turn it over to the audience for a few questions? Who has a question?
There's 2 questions in the chat, or there's one really amazing question in the chat.
Can you?
Like from my friend Bukola. Yeah. Do you want to ask it, or do you want? I'll read it.
Happy to, if you want me to.
Or Bukola, do you want to ask out loud?
Sure. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for the talk. I feel like I follow Jennifer around here all the talks that she does. Okay, so my question was, as written in the chat, thank you for your wonderful talks. I really appreciate the various levels and forms of language in both your works, written, textual, and or visual. Would you say that your work tackles linguistic imperialism at all? And do you now have a particular rubric or criteria for a successful use of that language?
Whoa, that's tough. Imperialistic in terms of like this language might be dominant or better. Is that what you mean?
Yes, I would say so. The idea, for instance, that some of us come from other cultures to speak other languages, but, you know, for instance, I'm Nigerian, and I'm sure you get some of this, even if you speak English fluently, you might be accosted and said, speak English, for example. But, you know, so as in language, visual, textual, oral, and how that works in your work. And if you have a rubric now or criteria for when that is successfully expressed in the work.
I don't have an exact rubric, except for that, as I said, I like for things to be misunderstood or not understood. I've done a bunch of pieces about language. I think the term that I've heard is, oh no, I can't think of it. It's what's like borrowing, borrowing words. So words like, well, the classic words like McDonald's or something, or hamburger, translated into Chinese is han bao bao. So I like making fun of learning a language through words that you already know. So I think that that is an interesting way to go about it, which also reflects the values of things that are important to these other cultures that they want to take. So the Chinese are happy to take Han Bao Bao for hamburger because they really like hamburgers, and McDonald's is all over. Or Kentucky for Kentucky Fried Chicken. How do you learn a language? The other angle on this is something that Jennifer and I talked about when I go to China and my Chinese is not very good, and that my relatives both laugh at, make fun of, and encourage me to learn better Chinese, because embedded in a language is huge, subtle cultural symbol. And
Chinese is all about tone too, and how like the simple up or down, like Cantonese has 10 tones, Mandarin has 9, Taiwanese has 8. Like that's why sometimes Cantonese speakers think they're superior because they have like 2 more added tones. But how like the word for mother can mean 10 different things based on that tone, and so there's something about that I'm really fascinated about in terms of language. I think too, and some of the fortune cookies I was finding is that the English, it doesn't have proper structure, and like whatever, yeah. And I think that goes back to imperialism. And I often think, do I need to correct them? And I think no. I like the idea of like living with that discomfort, but leaving for how it was intended by the maker. I even think in San Antonio, you know, there's English and Spanish, but there's Spanglish, and how that is very particular to this region. And like learning there's no word for pancakes, but it's los pancakees, and how I love that so much because it's how communities like take care of each other and celebrate their uniqueness in their language. Yeah, that's such a good question. Yeah.
Another thing I think is, I don't know if it's imperialism or not, but I think about how in cultures all over the world, as far as the remotest tribes in Brazil, they're wearing Nike t-shirts. So sometimes I think it's of that as being the most pervasive, invasive part of Western culture, that they would discard something that is probably much more appropriate to their climate to wear a Nike t-shirt. Did that address your question?
Those were good answers. Very good answers. So let's go to another one. Lee, are you still there? And would you like to ask your question?
I'm still here. I'm gonna change my question a little bit so that it's addressed to both Beth and Jennifer.
Okay.
So one, first of all, thank you so much. This has been fabulous. And Jennifer, I look forward to adding you to my collection in the future as well. I already have a bunch of Beth's pieces, but you can never have too many things from too many great artists. So my question is kind of twofold. One was just a simple question for both of you. Do you have a favorite form that you create? And the second question was just, you both work in such sort of, you know, kind of current events or topical things. Let's say COVID, for example, a lot of the work right now is about COVID. How do you know as an artist when you've made enough, if you know what I'm saying? Like when to stop, like when to move on and let go of that topic or subject? I hope that makes sense, that question.
You want to go, Jennifer?
Okay. I don't have a favorite form. I do think I can't make the same thing over and over again. I admire people that can, but my practice is really research based. So I really jump forms based on what is best for the idea. I think my work was not intentionally about COVID, but I was making work and still making work about the invisible labor practices of a lot of Black, brown, and yellow bodies that happen all over the world, about these global inequalities and how consumerism and capitalism has really pushed this even further. And like, as we know now, Amazon became much more richer because of the pandemic. So I think it's hard to hear your work is so relevant right now, and I've been making work about this for years. And I can keep making work about it because it doesn't feel like anything's changing or being made better. And I think it's super important to tell these stories. of like these people that like sew our clothes, trim our meat, take care of our dry cleaning. Like all these are people, and they are helping make our lives run and work better. Yeah, I think COVID just amplified it. Yeah.
Just a real quick answer from my point of view. I have some forms that are, they're sort of like my comfort forms, like the coil building. So I will make those, I will make more vases, I'm sure. I know I will. And I'll make more takeout boxes. And then somehow or another, I think you do just end up feeling like this idea has seen enough light of day or something. And you really have the most fun in your studio when you're onto a new idea, and it's just feeding you, and you're going, oh, okay, I can do that, or I can try that. And if you do the same thing too many times, I feel like it becomes less good. So the idea to make good work, I think, also fuels the idea to make new directions in work. Collaborations are kind of fun too. Maybe we should collaborate someday.
I would love that. I would say too, recently I've gotten a lot of prompts, like research a museum's collection and then make work and respond to it. And those have been like so uncomfortable in that, like I go through that phase of like, I don't know what to do. I don't like anything in this collection, or like I'm struggling, and then it always happens. But I think those are good places for artists to kind of be in, is to be unsure and uncomfortable in like what you're making, because then it kind of disrupts what you know of your work.
Yes.
Yeah.
So does anybody else have a question before we close?
Lucy, it's Deborah. I do.
Oh, good. Hello.
Hi, Deborah Locke. Well, I love this discussions. They're wonderful, and from two wonderful ladies. But I have this question. I'd like to address it to Beth, because I have one of her pieces.
Oh.
Okay. And it just occurred to me, with your takeout boxes and utensils and plates, did you think of making a fortune cookie to go with it?
No, I haven't. But that's
okay.
And
I don't know, but
I'll think about it. And I like the idea of working from fortunes also that Jennifer did, because I have a couple of odd ones that I keep. You know, you keep those best ones and put them on your fridge or something.
All right.
I'll think about it. They're small for one thing, but then would I want to make a big one? I don't know. So, or would I want to make one in a wrapper, which is kind of cool, but could I make one in a wrapper that looked like it was transparent? So just saying it is very stimulating, and possibly, but what were you thinking?
Yeah, and then you could maybe make one of the fortunes come out of the cookie.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It just occurred to me. So you're the artist.
It's a good prompt. It's a really good.
Okay. Oh, good. Glad I mentioned. Thank you. Thanks, Beth.
Because I wasn't going to do the takeout boxes at first. So that was sort of a prompt also.
What was the prompt?
Oh, I was in the show. Actually, Jim Lawton put me in the show.
And let me just say something that I'm not sure in my real introduction to Jennifer, did I mention Jim Lawton or UMass? I mentioned it in my practice.
Right.
But I want to say that Jennifer got her master's at UMass Dartmouth with Jim Lawton.
Yeah.
Rebecca Hutchins, and he said hello, so go ahead.
A show that never happened because of COVID.
Yes.
That's still sitting in my house. We were collaborating with woodworkers, and we were making the dinnerware for the table. Yeah.
Yep. So that we with my woodworker, we just talked about the idea of impermanence and moving around, and he wanted to make a table that would unfold and dinnerware could come out of it. So it seemed like a natural thing to have to-go boxes on that with that table. So that's what started the to-go box.
It's just a great theme and direction, and you can do so much with it, right?
I have a
Yeah.
question.
Oh,
I've
hey,
always-
Susan.
If we have time, do we have time? I have a
One more
question.
question. Go for it.
I think of you both as, it's so cool to have the generational piece, and I love how you just really admire and play off each other. That's so important. And with the internet, we can all kind of know about each other. So I'm not sure if I have a well-formed question, but I think of you both as kind of, your work is so personal, and personal meaning what's important to you, not just self. And there's a kind of generosity. So if you are Chinese, maybe many of the references are going to be way more than if you're not from Chinese culture, but there's a generosity on your part that those of us who aren't, feel like we can be part of it. There's a way in which there's a generosity there. So I guess part of my question is, one, to just thank you both for getting used to being uncomfortable with feeling like I get many of the references, but maybe not all of them, but I'm invited in anyway. But do you think about audience? Both of you are pretty well known and not, so is your audience, do you think about audience in terms of if it's Asian culture or non-Asian, and sort of who you want to own your work? And is that part of the making?
A little bit. In my making, I think of my sister really quick. I always think, what would she think of this? That's like a super quick audience. And then I think of people who've bought my work in the past, and I think about the ceramic world, and then I try to think about people who aren't necessarily in the art world, and that's where the COVID plates, I'm hoping, can reach out. I think that I think my cute kids are pretty universal. My mom said, "You're going to make money with that," when I started making. So she gave me some validation. And then my Chinese relatives, who, when I went to China and showed them my work, they just were nothing, no reaction. They just passed the pictures to other people, and that was a little disturbing. But then I thought, well, this is who I am. And like I said, when I found my community of Chinese Americans, this little tiny community of ABCs, that was important. And it just, to a certain extent, I just have to make this work. Or another downer was that Rudy Audio's wife just never liked my work. And
Really?
She doesn't like Chinese food, she,
Mhm.
and I was like, oh, Rudy, my hero, and then his wife would, she never had a good thing to say. So I'm aware of audience, and I respond to audience for sure. And it's, but it only goes so far. Like, you still have to do what you have to do.
That's right. A true
I
artist.
always try to approach my work with the different layers. So I love what you said, Susan, about the accessibility of it, and that you might not get all the Chinese things in it, and that's okay. I love that it's maybe accessible through the form. That's why I work a lot with domestic objects. So you may understand the back scratcher, but maybe not all the many layers of conversation that can happen with you. I like making work where people have to on the surface appears pretty imperfect, but when you get closer and you start untangling it, you see how messy and complicated it is. I think first and foremost, my audience will always, forever and always be women, and I make work from that point of view. Oftentimes too, because I'm working with hair and femininity, people are like, well, what about men? And I'm like, I kind of don't care. It's not my job to explain everything to them. And maybe that's me also being really unapologetic about this at this point in my life. And I can say the same, when my Chinese family saw my work, stoicism, 100%, they were really uncomfortable by it because they felt like it was too loud, and that it was too loud politically, or I was saying too much about our family or my experiences. I shouldn't be feeling these things and sharing them out loud. And yeah, I think it goes back to that community of Chinese Americans where they get all of it. And it's kind of really nice to be in a community where you don't have to explain everything, but they can also come to it too with different experiences. I think, yeah.
Well, so on that note, I want to thank both of you. And I think I speak for the audience too. Thank you for letting us into your world and sharing it with us and adding meaning to this really incredible exhibition. So thank you to Beth and thank you to Jennifer.
Thank
And
you.
You're very welcome, and thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. I'm gonna meet you in person one day.
I just want to, Tanya and I want to say one thing. I want to thank her because she is my noble assistant and made all this possible, you know. But we both have, you know, we both overcome some adversities today and this week. We both want to say, keep the goals away from the trouble.
Thank you.
That's the
Yes.
move.
We say it
Keep
every
the goals
day.
away from, and I like that. And look, you know, because it's so proactive. It's not,
Yeah.
keep the goals. We got to do something. So thank you all both. It's just a pleasure to show the work, and you share so much and you are different, and yet it is such a wonderful, beautiful exhibition. So here, here.